The terminal clock strikes 11:47 p.m. as fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting sickly yellow pools across polished floors. Gate 73 hums with the quiet urgency of a red-eyed departure. Passengers shuffle forward, clutching boarding passes, wheeled, luggage clicking against linoleum in an endless staccato rhythm. Flight 73 sits heavy on the tarmac beyond the windows, its aluminum skin reflecting runway lights like dead eyes. The aircraft appears ordinary enough, a wide-body international jet, freshly cleaned, fuel lines disconnected. Yet something about its silhouette seems wrong against the darkness, as if the shadows beneath its wings stretched afar. The gate agent scans boarding passes with mechanical precision, each beep echoing through the enclosed jetway. A businessman in seat 7A presents his ticket. The paper feels oddly thick, the ink slightly smeared. The date printed reads March 15th, though the departure board clearly displays March 12th. The agent's eyes linger on the discrepancy for a moment before waving him through. Inside the aircraft, passengers settle into their assigned seats while overhead bins slam shut with dull thuds. The cabin smells of recycled air and industrial carpet, tinged with something faintly metallic. A flight attendant moves through the aisles checking seatbelts, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She pauses at row 14, consulting her passenger list. The seat is occupied by a figure in a dark coat, but no name appears beside one for C on her manifest. The captain's voice crackles through the intercom, announcing departure preparations. His words sound distorted, as if broadcast through water. Outside, ground crew members wave their illuminated batons in practiced patterns, guiding the aircraft away from the gate. The plane begins its slow crawl toward the runway, windows revealing nothing but endless black tarmac punctuated by red warning lights. As Flight 73 lifts into the night sky, the terminal below shrinks to scattered pinpricks of light. The aircraft climbs steadily, banking left over the sleeping city. Inside the cabin, most passengers have already closed their eyes or pulled down window shades. But in seat 1 for C, the figure in the dark coat remains perfectly still, hands folded, staring straight ahead at nothing at all. The plane disappears into the darkness, leaving only the fading whistle of jet engines and the persistent hum of runway lights below. The airline operations center never sleeps. Banks of monitors glow blue in the dimmed room, while dispatchers track dozens of flights crossing oceans and continents. At 12:23 a.m., a supervisor notices an anomaly on her screen. Flight 73 shows 247 passengers aboard, but only 246 boarding passes were scanned at the gate. She pulls up the manifest, scrolling through the alphabetical list of names. Every seat appears accounted for, every passenger properly documented. Yet the discrepancy persists in the computer system like a persistent headache. The supervisor reaches for her phone to contact the aircraft, then hesitates. The flight is already over international waters. What could they do about an extra passenger now? 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, the aircraft maintains its eastward course. The cabin lights have been dimmed for the overnight flight, casting everything in a pale amber glow. Most passengers sleep fitfully, adjusting pillows and shifting in cramped seats. The steady drone of jet engines creates a hypnotic white noise that seems to muffle all other sounds. A flight attendant making her routine walk notices the lavatory door at the rear of the aircraft. The occupied indicator shows red, but she distinctly remembers this particular restroom being out of order. Before takeoff, a maintenance issue with the lock mechanism. She approaches the door and listens. No sound from within. She knocks gently. Silence. The attendant checks her watch. 12:41 a.m. The door has shown occupied for over an hour now. She tries the handle, but it won't budge. The mechanism feels solid, immovable, as if welded shut from the inside. A maintenance tag that should indicate the restroom's status is missing from its usual position. Beside the door frame, in the overhead compartment above row 22, a piece of luggage that no one remembers. Stirring begins to emit a faint ticking sound. The businessman in 7A stirs in his sleep, clutching his boarding pass with the wrong date. The figure in 1 for C has not moved since takeoff, has not blinked, has not breathed deeply enough for anyone to notice. The aircraft continues its flight path, across the dark ocean, following coordinates programmed hours earlier. On the ground, the supervisor finally makes her call to Flight 73, but the radio crackles with static that sounds almost like whispered voices. She tries again. The static grows louder, more insistent, until she's forced to hang up and stare at the monitor showing that impossible extra passenger somewhere in the sky above the Atlantic. The cabin temperature fluctuates without warning. Passengers pull blankets tighter, then moments later push them aside as an inexplicable warmth spreads through the aircraft. The climate control system hums and clicks, struggling against some invisible interference. Overhead vents open and close, seemingly at random, creating tiny wind currents that rustle papers and lift loose hair. A woman in row 18 wakes from uneasy sleep to find the passenger beside her gone. She remembers distinctly an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses, who had politely helped her store her carry-on bag. His seat is empty now, seatbelt unbuckled, but his jacket remains folded in the overhead compartment. She presses the call button, but the chime sounds distorted, echoing strangely in the confined space. When the flight attendant arrives, the woman explains about the missing passenger. The attendant checks her manifest again, running her finger down the list of names and seat assignments. According to her records, Seat 18B was never occupied. The woman insists otherwise, describing the man in detail: his gray sweater, his habit of clearing his throat, the book he'd been reading about ancient maritime disasters. The attendant excuses herself and walks toward the front of the cabin, but stops when she realizes she cannot remember which direction she came from. The aisle seems longer than it should be, stretching away into shadows that the dim lighting cannot quite penetrate. She counts the rows: 1, 2, 3, but loses track somewhere around row 15, as if the numbers are shifting when she's not looking. Directly at them, in the galley, security cameras display their feeds on a small monitor. The images show the cabin in real time, but with subtle wrongness, passengers appear in seats that look empty when viewed directly, and empty seats seem occupied on screen. One camera shows a figure walking down the aisle, but when crew members look up from the monitor, the aisle is empty. The ticking from the mysterious luggage in row 22 grows more pronounced. A child nearby begins to cry, not from any visible distress, but from a deep, wordless fear that she cannot articulate. Her mother holds her close, whispering reassurances that sound hollow in the recycled air. The child points toward the back of the plane, toward section that appears to extend beyond where the aircraft should end. The figure in 1-4C finally moves a subtle turn of the head toward the window. Outside, nothing but black ocean and darker sky, but in the reflection on the glass, other passengers can be seen moving through aisles that don't exist, boarding a plane that never landed, departing from gates that were demolished years ago. The aircraft flies on through the night, carrying its cargo of sleeping passengers and impossible contradictions toward a destination that grows more uncertain with each passing mile. At 2:17 a.m., every electrical system on Flight 73 fails simultaneously. The cabin plunges into absolute darkness. No emergency lighting, no exit signs, no glow from electronic devices. The sudden silence is more disturbing than the darkness. Even the constant hum of jet engines becomes muffled, as if the aircraft is suspended in cotton rather than air. Passengers wake to the disorienting blackness, calling out in confusion and rising fear. Their voices sound strangely distant, absorbed by the darkness itself. Someone screams a sharp, brief sound that cuts through the confusion before being swallowed entirely. The scream does not echo, does not fade. It simply stops, as if the person producing it has vanished mid-breath. The aircraft drops altitude without warning. Passengers feel their stomachs lurch as they're pressed against their seatbelts. Carry-on bags shift in overhead compartments with ominous creaking sounds. The descent is smooth but wrong, too controlled, too deliberate, as if the plane is being lowered by invisible hands, rather than falling under the influence of gravity and aerodynamics. Through the intercom system, the captain's voice emerges. From the silence, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing minor technical difficulties. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect to restore normal operations shortly." His tone is reassuring, professional, But something about the cadence feels off. The words come to evenly spaced, to measured, as if being read by someone who doesn't quite understand their meaning. A passenger in row 31 fumbles for her phone to use as a flashlight. The screen illuminates briefly, casting a small circle of blue-white light around her seat. In that momentary glow, she sees someone standing in the aisle, a tall figure in dark clothing, perfectly still despite the aircraft's continued descent. She blinks, and the figure is gone. But the impression of its presence lingers like an afterimage burned into her retinas. The blackout lasts exactly 13 minutes. When the lights return, they flicker weakly before stabilizing at half their normal brightness. The cabin appears unchanged, but passengers notice subtle differences. Magazines and seat pockets contain articles dated 5 years in the future. Safety cards show evacuation procedures for aircraft models that don't exist, and several overhead compartments are now sealed shut. Despite having been accessible moments before the blackout, ground control has lost all contact with Flight 73. Radar shows the aircraft maintaining course and altitude, but radio communications produce only static punctuated by brief moments of clarity in which controllers hear what sounds like multiple, overlapping conversations, different voices reporting the same technical difficulties, the same reassurances, the same flight path being followed by aircraft that cannot possibly occupy the same airspace. The figure in 1-4C has returned to its original position, staring straight ahead. But now other passengers can see it clearly, a void in human shape, an absence that draws the eye and refuses to be ignored. No one speaks of what they see. No one asks questions. The aircraft continues its journey through the dark sky above an ocean that seems to stretch on forever. In the pre-dawn hours, a duty officer at air traffic control runs a routine check on flight tracking systems. Flight 73's transponder signal appears normal on his scope: altitude, heading, and speed all within expected parameters. But when he cross-references the aircraft's registration number, his coffee grows cold in his hand. The computer database shows Flight 73 was reported missing 5 years ago on March 12th, same route, same departure time, same aircraft tail number. The official report sits buried in digital archives. Aircraft and all souls aboard presumed lost. Over Atlantic Ocean, no wreckage recovered. Cause undetermined. The officer pulls up news clippings from the original incident. Headlines speak of families waiting at arrival gates, of search and rescue operations that found nothing but empty ocean, of investigations that uncovered no mechanical failures, no weather events, no logical explanation for an aircraft that simply disappeared from radar. Somewhere over international waters, security footage from 5 years ago shows passengers boarding at gate 73. The same gate, the same faces. The businessman in 7A presenting his boarding pass with the wrong date, March 15th, instead of March 12th. The woman in row 18 helping an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses store his carry-on bag. The child in row 22 pointing toward the back of the plane with inexplicable fear in her eyes. Frame by frame, every passenger appears identical to those who boarded tonight's flight. The duty officer contacts his supervisor, who arrives within minutes to review the impossible data. They pull additional archived materials, maintenance records showing the aircraft was grounded permanently after the disappearance, insurance, claims paid out to families of the missing, memorial services held for victims whose bodies were never recovered. Yet Flight 73 continues its eastward journey across the Atlantic, its transponder signal strong and clear on their screens. International maritime rescue coordinators are contacted. Search and rescue vessels that participated in the original operation 5 years ago report an identical request coming through their channels, same coordinates, same aircraft description, same urgency. Radio operators describe hearing distress calls that match exactly the final transmissions from the original Flight 73, down to background noise and voice inflections. The supervisor orders a check of airport security systems. Cameras at gate 73 show the aircraft departing normally just hours earlier, but timestamp analysis reveals disturbing anomalies. The boarding process appears to have taken exactly the same duration as the flight 5 years ago, down to the minute. Passengers moved through security checkpoints at identical intervals. Even weather conditions at takeoff matched historical records with impossible precision. Personnel files are pulled for the flight crew. The captain reported for duty tonight despite his death certificate being filed 3 years ago. Following a car accident, the co-pilot underwent surgery for a brain tumor in 2019 and has been medically disqualified from flying ever since. 2 flight attendants appear on tonight's crew roster, whose employment was terminated after the original disappearance. 1 moved to another country. The other entered a psychiatric facility where she remains confined. Audio logs from 5 years ago are digitally compared to tonight's communications. Voice analysis software finds perfect matches in speech patterns, breathing intervals, even background ambient noise. The captain's announcement about technical difficulties plays identically to recordings from the original flight, including the unsettling cadence that suggested someone reading words they didn't understand. Satellite tracking data presents the most disturbing evidence. Flight 73's current position overlays precisely with the last known coordinates of the missing aircraft. Weather satellite imagery from 5 years ago, when compared to current conditions, shows identical cloud formations, wind patterns, and atmospheric pressure readings. The ocean below appears unchanged, as if frozen in time at the exact moment the original flight vanished. Ground crew members who serviced tonight's departure are interviewed by security personnel. Several report strange experiences, equipment that functioned perfectly during pre-flight checks but showed wear patterns consistent with aircraft that had been in service for decades rather than recently maintained. Fuel readings that fluctuated without explanation. A boarding ramp that felt unstable despite passing all safety inspections, as if the aircraft's weight distribution was somehow wrong. The airline's chief operating officer is awakened at home and briefed on the situation. Company records show Flight 73's aircraft registration was retired and sold for scrap metal years ago. The plane currently airborne shouldn't exist. Insurance investigators who handled the original case are contacted. They report receiving calls about the current flight from family members who attended memorial services for the original passengers. Emergency protocols are activated, but authorities struggle with the question of what exactly constitutes an emergency when the aircraft appears to be operating normally, while simultaneously being impossible. Search and rescue coordination centers debate whether to launch recovery operations for a plane that hasn't crashed, while following flight plans filed for an aircraft that was destroyed years ago. Airport personnel review tonight's departure logs. Gate agents remember processing the passengers, but describe a dreamlike quality to the boarding process. Routine actions performed without conscious thought. Faces that seemed familiar but couldn't be placed. Conversations that followed scripts no one remembered writing. Several employees report gaps in their memory surrounding the flight, as if crucial minutes were edited out of their experience. The mysterious figure in seat 140 becomes a focus of investigation. No boarding pass was issued for that seat. No ticket purchased, no identification provided. Yet multiple witnesses confirm seeing the passenger board the aircraft. Security cameras show the figure moving through checkpoints without triggering any alarms, passing through metal detectors that registered no presence, presenting documentation to agents who have no memory of the interaction. Air traffic controllers monitoring Flight 73's progress notice that other aircraft in the vicinity report unusual instrument readings when passing near the flight's position. Compass needles spin without explanation. GPS systems lose signal temporarily, and radio communications experience interference that sounds like overlapping voices from different time periods, all speaking the same words. Weather monitoring stations along the flight path detect atmospheric anomalies. Barometric pressure readings fluctuate in patterns that match disturbances recorded during the original disappearance. Temperature sensors register cold spots in the upper atmosphere that move in perfect synchronization with Flight 73's position. Electromagnetic instruments detect field variations that shouldn't occur in normal flight conditions. The duty officer continues monitoring the radar scope, watching the impossible aircraft maintain its course toward Europe. His equipment shows Flight 73 as a single blip of light moving across the screen. But occasionally, the display flickers and shows two identical aircraft, occupying the same coordinates, one from tonight and one from 5 years ago, flying in perfect formation through different decades toward the same unknown destination. Military radar installations are quietly alerted to track the anomalous flight. Their more sophisticated systems reveal disturbing details. Flight 73 appears to be casting a shadow on radar screens, as if the aircraft exists in multiple temporal layers simultaneously. Infrared sensors detect heat signatures that pulse in rhythms matching human heartbeats, but the patterns suggest far more life signs than the aircraft's passenger capacity should allow. As dawn approaches over the Atlantic, ground control faces an impossible decision. Flight 73 is scheduled to land in 6 hours at a destination where the same aircraft crashed 5 years ago. During an identical approach, controllers must decide whether to guide the impossible flight to its planned arrival or attempt to divert an aircraft that shouldn't exist to an alternate reality where it might safely cease to be. The senior flight attendant conducts her routine safety check, moving through the aircraft's service areas with practiced efficiency. In a maintenance compartment normally reserved for emergency equipment, she discovers something that shouldn't exist: a sealed metal box bearing official aviation markings and the designation Flight 73. Voice data recording, backup storage unit. The box appears old, its surface corroded with age and exposure to elements that should never affect equipment. STORED inside a pressurized aircraft. Oxidation patterns suggest decades of weathering, yet the compartment has been sealed since the plane's last major overhaul. The attendant's hands shake as she examines the container, noting serial numbers that don't match any equipment on her aircraft's manifest. Inside the box, wrapped in deteriorating foam padding, she finds multiple recording devices, analog tape, reels, digital storage units, and primitive magnetic wire recorders from aviation's earlier eras. Each device bears the same flight designation, despite representing technology from different decades. The most disturbing discovery is a modern solid-state recorder dated 5 years in the future, its housing showing signs of extreme temperature exposure and impact damage. The attendant connects the most recent device to the aircraft's audio system. Static fills her headphones before resolving into clear voices, the same voices she recognizes from tonight's flight crew. But the conversation describes events that haven't happened yet: landing gear failures during approach, passenger evacuations, emergency response protocols for situations that won't occur for several more hours. She advances through the recording, hearing her own voice reporting cabin conditions, making passenger announcements, coordinating with ground personnel at an airport they haven't reached. Her future self sounds tired, stressed, describing technical problems that began with the mysterious passenger in 14C and escalated into systematic aircraft failures that defied all logical explanation. The captain's voice on the recording discusses navigational anomalies with air traffic control. He reports compass deviations, GPS signal loss, and instrument readings that place the aircraft simultaneously at multiple coordinates across different time zones. His voice carries a note of controlled panic as he describes seeing other aircraft on radar that shouldn't exist, flights that went missing years ago, all following parallel courses toward the same unknown destination. One recording segment contains passenger conversations captured through the cabin monitoring system. The businessman in 7A speaks to someone about missing time, describing how he remembers boarding the flight, but cannot recall the departure or the hours that followed. His voice wavers as he explains seeing other passengers who claim to have been on the same flight during previous years, all experiencing identical phenomena in an endless cycle of repeated journeys. The woman in row 18 can be heard asking flight attendants about the elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses who helped her with her luggage. The recording captures multiple crew members insisting no such passenger was aboard, followed by the woman's increasingly desperate attempts to prove his existence. Her voice becomes distorted toward the end of the segment, as if the recording equipment itself is struggling to process her words. A particularly disturbing section contains audio from the aircraft's black box flight data recorder, but the information describes impossible flight parameters. The aircraft appears to be flying at altitudes both above and below its current position simultaneously, maintaining course headings that point in multiple directions at once. Engine performance data suggests the aircraft is both powered and unpowered, ascending and descending, accelerating and stationary at the same moment. The attendant finds recordings of emergency procedures being initiated for situations that haven't occurred. Crew members coordinate passenger evacuations, deploy emergency slides, and communicate with rescue vessels that arrive at crash sites before any crash has happened. The timeline of events described in these recordings begins hours before their current flight and extends years into the future, as if the aircraft exists across multiple temporal streams simultaneously. One tape contains the voice of the mysterious passenger from 1-4-C. The figure speaks in measured tones, describing the nature of their journey with clinical detachment. They explain how certain flights become caught in temporal loops, repeating their routes across time until all possible variations of their journey have been completed. The passenger's voice never changes in inflection or emotion, delivering cosmic horror truths with the same tone one might use to read departure announcements. Background noise in the recordings reveals sounds that shouldn't exist on a commercial aircraft. Wind patterns consistent with outdoor environments, ocean waves, despite being thousands of feet in the air, and the distant sounds of airport activity from terminals that were demolished decades ago. These ambient noises layer beneath conversations, creating an audio landscape that suggests the aircraft occupies multiple physical locations. Simultaneously, the attendant discovers recordings of her own future conversations with passengers who don't remember boarding the flight. She hears herself explaining that they've been aboard for hours, days, years, that time moves differently on Flight 73, and that arrival at their destination depends not on distance traveled, but on some unknown criteria that determines when their journey is complete. One device contains recordings of radio communications between multiple air traffic control centers across different countries and time periods. Controllers discuss the same flight using identical procedures and expressing the same concerns about navigation anomalies and missing aircraft. The conversations overlap and interweave, creating a chaotic soundscape of official confusion spanning decades. The most recent recording contains sounds from the current moment, her own breathing as she listens to the playback device, the ambient noise of the cabin around her, the conversations of passengers who are unaware they're being recorded from the future. She realizes she's hearing the sound of herself discovering these recordings, creating an audio feedback loop that extends infinitely backward and forward through time. As she continues listening, the attendant hears descriptions of the aircraft's final approach to destinations that don't appear on any current maps. Ground controllers guide Flight 73 to runways that exist in no physical location, following approach vectors that lead to airports built for aircraft that haven't landed, but are somehow already there, waiting for passengers who left years ago, but are still traveling toward a moment that has already passed, but hasn't yet occurred. The recordings end abruptly with silence that feels heavier than the mechanical sounds of the aircraft around her. The attendant realizes that she now possesses knowledge of events that may or may not happen, involving people who may or may not exist, aboard an aircraft that is simultaneously missing and found, lost and on course, departed and arrived in, a reality where time itself has become as unstable as the impossible flight path of Flight 73. The mystery of Seat 1-4-C deepens as crew members investigate the figure who appears to be present, yet leaves no trace. Visual confirmation exists, but reflections and sensor data suggest the seat is empty. The figure's clothes never crease. Their breath appears to regular, and the surrounding temperature drops subtly but perceptibly. Attempts to document them yield inconsistent photos, some showing an empty seat, others a distortion. Security logs confirm no one boarded with a boarding pass for 1-4-C. Still, gate staff vaguely recall an indistinct figure checking in. Cabin footage shows 1-4-C as both occupied and vacant, sometimes simultaneously, depending on the angle. Crew checking weight balance note minor discrepancies as if carrying someone who doesn't register in systems. Passengers begin reporting strange sensations, being watched, moments of confusion, a chilling familiarity. Children react most strongly, pointing fearfully or speaking of dreams that seem tied to the figure. Conversations near the seat trail off into silence. Even the air seems to avoid the area, creating a stillness that dampens sound. The aircraft begins its descent, but not toward any known destination. Navigation systems input unfamiliar coordinates unprompted. Outside the windows, the landscape twists and reshapes itself. Impossible coastlines, buildings forming and dissolving, cities appearing only to vanish. The cabin dims, not from loss of power, but as if time itself slows. Inside, rows stretch farther than the aircraft's design should allow. Row numbers climb into triple digits. Some passengers appear to wear vintage clothing from long past decades. Crew attempt to serve travelers who may no longer be present or perhaps never were. The sense of déjà vu becomes overwhelming. Memories blur. Suddenly, the figure in 1-4C moves, looking toward the rear of the aircraft, where a corridor now extends impossibly far. Passengers begin to fade from view one by one. The systems report a smooth descent, but location data shows the plane simultaneously above the ocean and already on the ground. Landing gear deploys with a metallic echo that seems to ripple backward and forward in time. The runway appears intermittently, only visible in peripheral vision. Through it all, the plane slows, coasting toward a terminal that may not exist in any singular timeline. At last, a voice over the intercom welcomes the passengers, though it's unclear who speaks. The aircraft has arrived at its final destination, a place between memory and anticipation, where every journey continues and no arrival is final. Flight 73 has landed, but not where it departed, and not in any time that can be measured.